Today we're going to do a little work to get you ready for the next program, which is called Quadrilaterals. So you need a few things today. You need the program info sheet, so it should look like this. You also need this sheet. It's the Quadrilaterals hierarchy chart, because we're going to write a couple methods together today. Okay, so let's start. So starting with this sheet, it says the program will take the coordinates of 4 points and determine the most specific quadrilateral possible. Talk about what that means in a few minutes. The coordinates of the 4 points in the coordinate plane can be given as A, B, C, D. A I'm calling x1, y1, all the way down to D, which is x4, y4. The slope and the length of any segment can be found by the following formulas, where x1 and y1 and x2, y2 are any 2 points. So these are just the formulas that you should know from geometry. Slope is change in y over change in x. The distance formula is right there. So you subtract the x coordinates and square them, plus subtract the y coordinates, square those, take the square root of it. And then it says, given the coordinates of the 4 points, A, B, C, D, we're going to write a program that will determine if quadrilateral ABCD is a square, rectangle, rhombus, parallelogram, trapezoid, and quadrilateral. So if it doesn't fit any of these specific ones, we'll just call it a quadrilateral. Reminder, if the points satisfy more than one condition, you must identify the type that most completely describes the quadrilateral. So for example, definition of a rectangle is opposite sides equal, 4 right angles. Well, that's true of a square also. So a square is technically a rectangle, but if the rectangle has all equal sides, you need to call it a square rather than a rectangle. You should create a class called Quad that will contain the non-void methods. So again, we're going to have all public ints or public doubles or public whatevers, but not public voids necessary to complete the program. The driver class will contain the code necessary to utilize the methods from the quad class and give the proper output. All right, let's flip it over. The input file looks something like this. And if I show you exactly what it looks like, if you want to see, there's the input file, not that different. So it looks like a bunch of random numbers, but what it actually is are the coordinates. So if you look really quickly here, this is x1, y1, x2, y2, x3, y3, x4, y4. There's the points that correspond with those. So when you're reading in from a file, the first thing you're going to have in the driver class is just reading in those values. x1 equals sc.nextInt, x2 or y1 equals sc.nextInt, and then x2 equals sc.nextInt, y2 equals sc.nextInt, all the way down to x4 and y4. So you're going to have a lot of sc.nextints to start off in your file reading. The output needs to look like this. So if these were your 4 points, if you plotted those and looked, it ends up being a trapezoid. First part is important. So before you do anything else, it says use graph paper to determine the output for each quadrilateral required for the hierarchy chart. So these are the actual points you're going to be using. So what I want you to do is you should take a piece of graph paper, and there should be graph paper that's available that you should have picked up also for this program. You're going to literally just plot every point. So plot 1, 5, 4, 3, 6, -4, -3, 2, and see what type of shape it is. I'm telling you, it should be a trapezoid. This is required for your hierarchy chart. It's part of your hierarchy chart. I'm going to be looking for that and going to make sure that that's correct before you go on. Because I want to make sure your reasoning is correct in figuring out what type of quadrilateral you have. Remember, if you flip over to the front, you have your list of options. Okay, so what else could help you a little bit? If you take a look at this chart, and maybe you want to take a snapshot of this on your phone while it's up on the screen here. This is kind of a hierarchy chart of quadrilaterals. So squares have all sides equal, opposite sides are parallel, and all right angles. Rectangles and rhombi are a little less specific than that. And if you go down from the top, you can kind of see what happens when you add in the different qualifications. So every one of these is a quadrilateral, 4-sided figure. If you've got one pair of parallel sides and one pair of non-parallel sides, it's a trapezoid. If both pairs of opposite sides are parallel, it's a parallelogram. If both sides of opposite sides are parallel and there's a right angle, it's a rectangle. If instead both sides are parallel, but all the sides are also equal, no right angles, it's a rhombus. I should say US, rhombus. And then finally, if all sides are equal and you have a right angle, you have a square. All right, so we'll talk about this down here in a second. But again, take a picture of that if you think you need a memory jog of how to tell what type of quadrilateral every shape is. Okay, let's go back to this. So what I'm looking for first, your first step shouldn't be anything tricky. Divide this sheet of paper into, how many do you need? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We need 7 graphs. I don't want one giant graph where you graph all of the quadrilaterals on top of each other. I want 7 specific graphs. So like a graph for number 1, a graph for number 2, a graph for number 3, etc. Plot the points and write what type it is. That's the first thing I'm going to be looking for when I ask to check your hierarchy chart. Okay, next up, we need to do some work on how to actually make this happen. So if you go to this page, I've given you some of the specific types of quadrilaterals or methods that you'll need to use. Okay, so these are the methods that have to be in the quadrilaterals, the quad class. We've got public something slope, distance method for is parallel, either yes they are parallel or no they aren't. Same for is perpendicular, and is congruent basically just means if the distances are equal. So before we start writing some of these, let's look at what the program looks like when you run it. If I run my quad program right here, we've got our heading method. So just like your other programs, use that right heading method. And then all that I print out is I print out the coordinates. Now that took some work. It's just a system.out.print, but remember the only numbers that are variables are 1, 5, 4, 3, etc. So I had to do like system.out.print and then in quotes a with a parentheses plus x1 plus comma in quotes plus x2 plus parenthesis in quotes. You know what I mean? So you have to switch between variables and writing words. So that takes a little bit of time, nothing hard. And the only other thing that prints out is the type of quadrilateral it is. And these are the answers. So again, if you want to take a picture now, would be a good time to do it so you can see what your answer should be. It's also in the black binder. Okay, so there's my goal. So in order to make that happen, we need to make use of all these methods. Now you can write other methods if you want. You don't need to. So these are all you should need. And I'm going to write a couple with you. So the first method that I'm going to write is the slope method. Now the slope between two lines we know is just x1 and x2 changing y, y2 minus y1 over changing x, x2 minus x1. What type of method do you think this should be? What type of numbers would the slope be? Well, even though the coordinates are all integers, since it's going to be a division, it could easily come out to be a decimal. So it's going to need to be a public double. So make sure you write public double. And in order to find the slope between 2 points, what parameters would I need? Well, I need to know what all of those points actually are. So we would need x1, y1, x2, y2. So I'm going to say int x1, int y1, int x2, int y2. Okay, and all those are integers. Now I'm not going to write the comments, but you know you'll need pre and post conditions like you're used to doing now. And remember, all I have to do is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So I could just return that, but there is a problem. What happens if, what type of slope could be bad? Well, what's the slope of this line? Slope of that line is 0. There's no problem with 0 slope because it's just doing y2 minus y1. That'd end up being 0 over some number. 0 over a number is 0. That would work. But what about that slope? What would you say that slope is? That slope's undefined. Now, how am I going to make undefined something? I can't return undefined because that's a string, and I got to return a double. So this isn't a perfect fix, but essentially what we need to do is we need to figure out what number, what double could I use that would mean undefined that probably wouldn't actually be a real slope value. Well, most likely I'm not going to have a ginormous number for a slope value. So we could make a million mean undefined. We can make a billion mean undefined. We could also use this thing called integer.max value. Now, because of restrictions with how much memory you can use, there's a limit to how big you can make any type of integer, and that's integer.max value. If I just do system.out.print integer.max value, sorry, waiting for the computer to catch up here. There it is. If I just type integer.max value, now if you notice, that's capitalized with an underscore because max value is a constant. So integer.max value is the biggest value that can be stored inside an integer, and when I run it, that number is that, which I think is something like 2 to the 31st power, something like that. So that for us is going to mean undefined slope, because probably I don't actually have 2 points that would have that as a slope. Be pretty steep, be almost undefined anyways. Some people always wonder what happens if I added 1 to this. You think I'd get an error? Let's see. No error here. When I run it, it gave me negative of almost the same number. What do you think happened? Yeah, it's cyclic. It cycles around. So that number I had before was the biggest number I could get. If I added 1 to that, I went from the biggest number back to the smallest number I can do, which is that negative number. Anyway, that's kind of just a fun fact. Let's get back to writing this. So I need to make an if-else. If it's undefined slope, we're going to return integer.max value. How would I know if the slope is undefined? Well, the denominator here would be 0, so x2 minus x1 would be 0. So I can just say if x2 minus x1, I'm checking if it's equal, so I need double equals 0. In that case, we want to return integer.max value. And again, that will mean undefined for us. Else, what do we want to do? Well, otherwise, I want to just return that slope formula, which would be return y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. And that should work. Or will it? And I kind of put you into a trap here. There's actually a problem with this. And you don't have any idea what it is? What type of variables are all of these? x2, y1, x2, x1? They're all ints. What happens if I have integer division? What if I ended up with 5 on top and 9 on the bottom? What would I get? Not 5/9 like I want. I'd get 0, which we don't want. I need to make this, think of it as a double. And I could cast as a double if I wanted to. The easiest way to do it is to take any one of your variables up here, and instead of making them an int, just say it's a double. So now let's say x1 was the number 1. Since I made it double x1, now it's 1.0. And as soon as I've got some sort of double in this math, it makes the whole thing a double. So you don't have to cast it as a double if you make that one variable a double up there. And you can make them all doubles if you want, but 1's all it takes. All right, questions on that? If there is, call me over or make a note so that you can ask me. Okay, next. Distance formula, I'm going to leave to you. That one's not tricky. You just got to use that math.square root with the 4 coordinates again. Is parallel, how do you check if 2 things are parallel? Well, 2 things are parallel if their slopes are equal. So you don't have to calculate slope again. You can just give it two slopes, slope 1 and slope 2, and either return that yes, those are equal, or no, those aren't equal. Is perpendicular is a little tricky though. So go down to is perpendicular, and we're going to write that one. Okay, so now if two lines are perpendicular, what do you know about their slopes? They're negative reciprocals. So like if I had a slope of 3/5, the perpendicular slope would be negative 5/3. So essentially, I have to take the negative and flip it. If my slope was 5, the reciprocal would be negative 1/5. So if I'm doing is perpendicular, I'm either checking yes, it is perpendicular, or no, it's not perpendicular. So what type of method do you think that should be? Hopefully you're saying Boolean. Public Boolean is perpendicular. And in order to tell if two lines are perpendicular, what information do we need? We need their slopes. So let's just say double slope 1 double slope 2. Okay. Now again, it's fairly easy to check except this problem with undefined. Essentially, I can always just take is slope 1 equal to negative 1 over slope 2. If that's true, that means they're negative reciprocals. Except that's not exactly true if it's undefined. What's perpendicular to an undefined slope? 0. And vice versa. What's perpendicular to a 0 slope? Undefined. Since I'm using integer.max value for undefined, 1 over integer.max value isn't going to equal 0. So I got to check that case separately, which is a little bit annoying. Okay, so we have to do an if statement and write small because this is a big if statement. We basically have to check if either of these slopes, slope 1 or slope 2, if either of them are equal to 0 or if either of them are equal to integer.max value. So I need to check if slope 1 equals 0 or slope 2 equals 0 or that integer.max value thing. So or slope 1 equals integer.max value or slope 2, told you to write small, equals integer.max value. So if any of those values are true, then if they're negative reciprocals of each other, slope 1 would be 0 and slope 2 would be integer.max value, or vice versa. So inside here, I need another if statement. If slope 1 equals 0 and slope 2 equals integer.max value, or the other way around, slope 1 equals integer.max value, and slope 2 equals 0. Let's put a big parenthesis around that whole thing. So if this is the case, then they are perpendicular. So I can return true. Else return false. Am I done? Well, I'm done with the hard case, but that was only if 0 or integer.max values involved. We still have to just take care of just typical everyday slopes. That's a little bit easier though. I'm going to run into is congruent. Hopefully you have some room. But the else to the original if is just to return slope 1 equals -1 divided by slope 2. So if 0 is not involved, then is the first slope the negative reciprocal of the second slope? And I don't have to worry about integer division here because slope 2 was already a double. Okay, so that'll make the is perpendicular method work. The other methods that I haven't written are much easier than these, so don't overthink them. So again, is parallel, I have to check if the slopes are equal. So they can both equal 0 or both equal integer.max value. You don't need a special case for that. This should be one line of code. Same with is congruent. If they're congruent, we're taking their distances and seeing if those are equal. So again, it should just be one line of code for is congruent. Distance formula, you can do that in one line also. Just return that square root of the distance formula. So after you plot all your points and determine what type of quadrilateral it is, this is your next step. All right, and then finally, if you flip over to the back, you have the last part. It says write the driver class. Use a scanner object to read each x and y value into xa, ya, xb, yb, etc. Then compute slope AB, slope BC, slope CD, all the way down and all the distances. And send it to the quad methods. It says, note, you may not need to use all the slopes or distances, so feel free to leave out those that you don't use. Then write the steps to print the type of quadrilateral found by the 4 points. Okay, so on this side, you're going to write your driver class. And again, I'll start you off just so you get an idea, and then hopefully I can send you off from there. So our variables. Basically, they listed them out for you. So all of these will need to be variables. Those are all integers. So you'll have int xa, ya, sorry, xb, yb, all the way down to xd, yd. You'll need variables to hold the slopes and distances. And those will be what types? Doubles. So double slope AB all the way down to slope AD. Same with the distances. Then we can say distance AB all the way down to distance AD. And you can abbreviate like that, that's fine. What's the first thing we always put in the program? Instance of the classes. So we're going to need the quad class. So we'll say quad q1 equals new quad. Do your utilities. So you'll have to copy and paste that in like you've been doing. Utilities.write heading. Name the program this time as Quadrilaterals. And then all the other stuff that you have to do. And then you're reading in from a file quad.dat. So you'll have your try, you'll have your catch, you'll have your while sc.hasNext, you'll have all of that. You don't need to write that in your hierarchy chart, but obviously use your other programs to help you with that when you actually type it. The first thing you need to do is read in your points. So remember, the quad.dat file is set up so that it's listed by the x-coordinate of A, the y-coordinate of A, the x-coordinate of B, the y-coordinate of B. So you have to read them in that order. So you'll have xa equals sc.nextInt XB, or sorry, ugh, I just told you to read them in the right order and then I didn't do it. YA equals SC.nextInt. And you'll do that all the way down to XD and YD. Okay, now when you get to figuring out the slopes and the distances, some people have trouble with that. The way this is set up, it's letting you send it X and Y of the first coordinate, X and Y of the second coordinate. So just be aware of what you're sending it. If I want to find, for example, slope AB, I would set that equal to Q1.slope, because I'm using the slope method in the quad class. And I need to send it the coordinates for A and B. So I'm going to send it XA, YA, XB, YB. I'm going to let you write on from here, but then you'll have slope BC, and instead of sending it A's and B's, you're going to sending it XB, YB, XC, YC. Just send it the right coordinates and it'll calculate the right slope. Same with the distances. Now, once you get down to it, you're going to need to use these slopes to figure out what type of quadrilateral it is. And notice I didn't make any Boolean variables, and you really should never have a Boolean variable. I shouldn't say never. You rarely will have one. But that's what this other thing mentioned. Instead of making Boolean parallel, and then I set parallel equal to S1.isParallel slope AB, slope CD, and check if parallel is true, then maybe it's a parallelogram, I don't know. Put those right in if statements. So eliminate that step, and all of your if statements, which are also going to happen in the driver when you're trying to figure out what type of quadrilateral it is, put it right inside if statements. And remember, you can add ands. So if you want to check if AB and CD is parallel, but also BC and AD, you could say S1.isParallel slope AB, slope CD, and S1.isParallel slope BC, slope AD, or something like that. So you're going to have a lot of if statements, a lot of nested if statements to figure out. But once you've figured out that it's got all the qualifications, you can just say system.out.print parallelogram, or whatever it is. Okay? Okay, I know that was a lot. What you have to do, first step, plot all the points, tell me what type of quadrilateral it is. That'll get you thinking about how to classify them. Second step, finish these three methods: distance, is parallel, and is congruent. Third, finish off the driver. Once you've got all of that, or if you get stuck and have questions, obviously call me over and I can help you out. Okay? Good luck.